Hello, everybody, and welcome to this first full proper episode of 2021 of the Higher Ed Geek podcast. So this is going to be episode number 112 with George Moore, the CTO of Cengage, which is a big player here in the edtech space. So really grateful for this conversation. We did actually record this last month, so before the new year, so it'll be coming out here as the first new episode, and we'll have a lot more great stuff coming up in the following weeks that we did actually record here in 2021. But this stuff is still really resonant, really relevant, just about the landscape of digital learning as we're heading into this new year. So really appreciate George's insights and all that he shared. There's a great article that he wrote that we linked out to in the show notes for the episode. So definitely go check that out. Connect with George, keep the conversation going. Yeah, so this is, our first episode. And with that, as I mentioned in the quick premiere episode, I've got the merch store going strong. There is actually a great sale going on right now if you're listening to this. So from January 13th through the 16th, that sale is going on in the merch store. Some great deals there. Great way to support the show. So definitely go take a look and appreciate everyone's support there. But otherwise, just kind of sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode number 112 with George Moore. All right. So I'm super excited for our conversation today. This is going to be one of the episodes to kick us off of season 5 of the podcast. And I've heard of Cengage just kind of in the ether of the higher ed tech world. So I'm excited to learn more about the work that you and your team are doing, George, and more about your story and everything. So we will start there as we always do, though, if you want to introduce yourself and your professional journey of how you got to be where you are today.
Sure. Thanks, Dustin, for having me. I'm excited to be on. So I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Cengage. Cengage is the largest US-based content and technology company and have about 12 million students that we serve annually. My journey to this position, I'm an engineer by training, started off kind of slinging code in a lot of different spaces, both small startups and large multinational companies. Some of the common threads through my career have been, working with in spaces and companies that technology was going to be a large change agent going forward. So I was at the beginning of how technology helped revolutionize the real estate industry, bringing some of the first multiple listing services online back in the 90s. A lot of really fascinating stuff to see how you could go from printed books of the houses that are for sale in your town to what we have today, Realtor.com, and different kind of real-time information. I then moved in, a lot of different companies. I've spent a lot of time in the pharmaceutical space, building software to help facilitate the new drug applications. And a proud thing that I have being in the news recently is all of the new vaccines are using software that the company I was part of built and distributed out to companies to help take this vast amount of information and get it through the regulatory affairs process as fast as possible. So interesting things. I've been at Cengage for about 8 years now, be 8 years in January. And, I came onto this journey really for the same piece, that I saw a huge inflection point, that education had been a laggard in adopting technology to help create better experiences and more efficiency. And I thought Cengage was a great platform, 100-year-old company that really was a cornerstone in the industry, and in an industry that really needs some efficiencies and better experiences that kind of 21st technology can bring to the table.
Yeah, and that's fascinating. I guess just the different things that you've done. I guess, is it fair to say, because I guess like what I sort of was taking in, I guess, is that like it seems as though you were kind of like going where you feel like your skills and experience could kind of make the most impact, like you kind of working and seeing this opportunity with real estate listings. It's like that's huge, just kind of sees a seismic shift of how people find their homes, and then like in the healthcare industry, and that's having like kind of a through line to our current moment. And then in education, it seems as though like it maybe was less about like the company or the role itself is just like you're kind of getting at it like, oh, okay, this is like an opportunity for me to really be of use and of value and really make a big impact? Like, was that kind of like a connective tissue for you, I guess?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think, look, I love making a big impact, and I love change. I love challenges, and so each of the career choices I've made have all been around how can the work I do make a big impact and help facilitate positive change. And it's great that my hobby. I've been writing programming since I was about 10 years old. That's something that I thought of as a hobby and was a passion. And my wife calls it my crossword puzzles, as I still have my side projects that I like to work on.
Mm-hmm.
That became something that I could use to have an impact. So it's been great. I've turned my hobby into my full-time job, and not everyone gets to do that. And I think Cengage has the inflection point with Cengage. I currently have a fifth grader and a ninth grader in school, and education is such a impactful piece on people's lives. And something that we'd like to say at Cengage is, we believe in the joy and the power of learning. And I truly believe that statement, there's so much power in it, and that aha moment when you solve a problem, when you figure out a crossword puzzle or whatever it might be, that kind of dopamine effect that happens is such an empowering component. And I think technology really has the opportunity to help progress this. The textbook, which Cengage started its history in, was a great tool to put in between a brilliant scientist and an eager student. The textbook helped organize the conversation, helped organize the scope in which how broad we're going to talk about today, and then what order we should talk about these topics. And it was really the facilitator between that relationship. And I think, but that's 300-year-old technology. And so today, I think Cengage's role is very similar, but it's using today's technology to help facilitate that relationship.
Yeah, I mean, well, that perfectly segues to my next question of, anything else, I guess, in terms of explaining a bit about Cengage and, ways that maybe people
Sure.
maybe have interacted with it and just sort of, kind of like affirming like, yeah, like this is like a, maybe a common product or common like tool
Yeah,
platform.
absolutely. We're one of the largest companies that nobody knows about.
Yeah.
We have about 5,000 employees. We're around international company, 26 offices around the country, or excuse me, around the world. We really focus in a few different areas. We have a very large U.S. higher education business where it started, as I said, as a textbook business, but has moved to the majority of our experiences are all online experiences and helping the blended experience. So both fully online courses, but also traditional courses that have moved to this blended learning, being able to create these more experiential learning environments inside the classroom or as part of their at-home work for that class. So that's the largest part of the business, but we also have a big library reference business. That business started as a microfiche business years and years ago, and now is one of the largest online databases of reference information for the humanities. We teach English language. We own National Geographic Learning. And so we have a big business where we're teaching English as a second language around the world, helping people get new opportunities. And really, we look at English as the language of commerce. So we take the National Geographic approach where we think of this as the world's English, not any specific region. And then we have a K-12 business where we work in the history and reading and leveraging a lot of the National Geographic assets in that process. So large company, 5,000 employees. We touch about 12 million students every semester, one way or another. And we also brought in probably got the most notoriety around bringing in what's some people are calling the Netflix of education. So really changing the dynamic of how you should interact with content when you're going to college, with the idea that instead of trying to figure out the best, cheapest way to buy a book, should I rent one? Should I buy it? Should I get an ebook? A flat rate for $119, you can have 100%. You can access to 25,000 ebooks, all of the digital solutions, all your homework solutions. Get a free rental as part of that for your courses, all for $119 a semester. So just trying to simplify our business model so that they're more in line with the way students interact today. We're not buying DVDs anymore. We're subscribing to subscriptions. That's how all of your content interactions should be.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I mean, just you're kind of noting just like as this venerable institution, how much things have changed within the lifespan of the company and everything. And I guess just, for the time that you have been there, I think you said like around like 8 years or so, um, as like a chief technology officer, like how do you see your role fitting into all those things? Do you feel like you're the one that is driving the change, or are you kind of uplifting ideas that like, others have, maybe like a mixture of both? I guess just
Yeah.
kind of a quick snapshot of like your role within all of that.
Yeah, so I'm responsible for all technology, customer service, our business systems, but also all of our products that are sold to our customers. I think the biggest, I would say, looking back, I didn't realize that this was going to be a big part of my role when I started the job, but in retrospect, one of the secrets of Cengage's success over these years has been the ability to leverage the people who've been here. We have a very long tenure. Half of our employees, give or take, their tenure is probably over 10 or 15 years, and some 20. And
Wow.
I actually had a 50-year anniversary on one of my employees about 6 months ago. So been here a long time, been part of it, and then marry that with people who have been here for 3 years, and I think that 3 to 4 years is the other half of the tenure. And so the blending the history of what helped get us here with the outside and kind of new technology and new way of approaching problems from the people who've come to this company really has been a big part of my role. Is how can you blend those experiences and that history with the external experiences and other types of how to approach problems is really, I think, what's made it different. We're not trying to go change everything. We understand where we came from and the power of the content and technology, but we also understand that we've got to bring this into the 21st century, and there's a lot of companies we can learn from and help emulate.
Gotcha. Well, that's certainly, I always just like when I feel like there's like smooth segues, because like, yeah, that idea of like, history, the future and all that, I feel like 2020, is
Wow,
this
quite a year.
interesting, yeah, like, what a year to like kind of have that sort of like, place as like this venerable institution that we're, higher ed in general, confronting things that haven't really been faced in quite some time. And certainly to a certain extent, this is just kind of accelerating change that was already happening. But I'll ask you a question, sort of like an interesting kind of angle, because I as the optimist, very positive person, I'll just be curious kind of what kind of, how this hits you, is sort of reflecting on all the digital education experiences in 2020, certainly, the quick pivots, the transitions to fully online,
Yeah.
with like, decent bit of lead time. What has been like reassuring to you this year with everything that's been going on in digital education?
Yeah, there's two different areas I'll focus on there. I think when COVID hit and I had to sit in front of all of our employees and talk about what we were going to do, and talk about what this meant for Cengage, and we knew that it was going to hit us, and just the mere fact that the U.S. higher education depends a lot on international students, and we knew that they wouldn't be able to come. And so we knew that kind of financially and practically the schools were all going to be in a lot of stress. And, we talked about this is going to be a big storm and we need to hunker down and try to make sure we can weather the storm. Because at that time I felt that that once you got through the storm, things would brighten up. And I thought this would be a good thing for Cengage and the industry. And so I think the thing that I've seen, which is great to see, is, we threw all of the educators in the United States into the deep end of the pool, and they all had to learn how to teach online overnight. In the first few weeks of COVID, we opened up all of our systems free of charge, so that these students and instructors could quickly get the assets they need. Let's not worry about the price. Let's worry about getting them in. And we had over 1 million students sign up in a few days. We helped set up like 50,000 courses, give or take, in that few days. So massive amount of work. And I think the most encouraging thing that came out of it is, in that same metaphor, we threw them into the deep end of the pool and none of them drowned. And they all realized the kind of unilateral comment I get is, it wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. This technology I've avoided for a while, but I see where it fits in. And so I think, COVID is going to be this inflection where the education industry has always been very reticent on taking on big change and taking on technology and not going too fast. This forced us to all go very fast. And when we got there, we realized, we still need to learn the backstroke, but we're not drowning. And this is something we can digest, and this is something that is not overly complex. So I think so. It's encouraging that when we poll students, they always felt that they wanted a better digital learning experience. When you polled instructors in the past, there was always a lot of intrepidation. Recently, we just polled instructors. We do a big annual survey every year, over 100,000 instructors. And this year, over 84% of them in one of the surveys said they felt prepared to teach online. So to me, I think this is, we're going to look back 10 years on this big COVID blip that was, I think, an inflection point in kind of how we think about education, how we think about, I think a digital component of education is probably here to stay. That it is a good tool in the toolbox for even a very established four-year institution. That you get to watch the lecture a few times, and that's something. If our objective is to disseminate information and prepare our students for future, getting them to understand the concept is the number one objective. So if there's tools that we can do to help facilitate that, we need to use everything we can. And I think that this is going to be a time where we look back and say that if it wasn't for COVID, I don't know if we would have come as far as we have at this point.
Yeah. And I mean, it's because these are the kind of conversations, it's just reassuring that like the pattern continues, I guess, is that like, these things will be here to stay. Cause I keep worrying. It's like, are we just going to like backtrack because everybody's like, oh, okay, I'm only using it cause I have to or whatever, but that like, like you can replicate like really high quality digital education now. And that's been really made apparent to a lot more people. And that can be a kind of companion modality, like somebody could have kind of some fluidity between taking a course in person or online or be entirely online and, still come to campus if they want to use like spaces or something. But and I think through all these conversations, it's like, because I guess for me too, it's like, just kind of wallowing in the misery that is 2020. Like this has been a really hard year for so many people. It's like acknowledging that, accepting that and learning from that, but also being like, well, there's some silver linings here. Like we should really try to acknowledge, like, like you were saying, like people put in a lot of hard work to do these pivots and seeing that like, wow, we're not drowning. Like this is working. Like people are feeling confident. People are feeling prepared. And like, we're addressing, the needs and desires of students and creating more of that accessibility. And just, I think that this is like, like it's going to be tipping over and kind of getting this momentum really going, that like, there's been so many people obviously that have been working hard to like get digital education to where it is now. And this is kind of, I think what's going to get it over the hump of just like, okay, this is just going to be everywhere in some, respect, where there's just going to be, probably a lot more online courses and hybrid programs and everything like that, which I'm really happy to see.
And I think it's interesting about this time. I did every year I get interviewed for my 2020 my next year predictions. So last year I did my 2020 predictions. I didn't predict this, so that's. But what I did say is that I thought this was going to be a year where the CIO of a university really was going to be more in the spotlight and going to take on, and I happened to bumble into that, and sure enough, that happened. What I think is going to be interesting at this time, in working with CIOs in the past, one of their biggest challenges was to get a seat at the table and to kind of push, we bought an LMS for everyone, but I can't get them to use it. We created this, but I can't get them to use it. Now I think it's, CIOs are in an interesting position that I think they can now become somewhat their own bottleneck, that now all of a sudden demand is rushing in. And are they prepared to be able to thoughtfully and succinctly and in a understanding security and other aspects, are they ready to kind of respond to this inflection point at a higher level? And it's going to be, I think it's going to be a challenge. I think it's something that that all of them are working together to figure out. Not, all of a sudden they have a seat at the table, and then many times they're at the head of the table, and that's not the position they had historically been in.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that there's certainly a technical component to this quite a bit, but there's kind of the two next questions that I want to talk about is that idea of kind of drilling into sort of this reality of like, more digital education. Like there's just going to be more of it, more places, more subjects and more faculty and all these kind of things. So I think, in my mind, there's kind of always this temptation of like, you kind of are maybe locking things down, making it really kind of like carbon copy and standardized. And there's some value in that. There's some efficiencies there and, kind of assurances of kind of predictability. But certainly there could be something lost there as well. So, I'll kind of start it open-ended of just sort of that dilemma of like, kind of having something that's really kind of almost kind of highly processed digital education, but still wanting to honor kind of the unique aspect of like what faculty can bring to their courses and making it, perhaps a little bit more dynamic and engaging, like kind of threading that needle. Like what are your kind of initial thoughts there? And
I've done a lot of thinking about this. I actually just wrote an article about this. And, I think the U.S. education has some tremendous unique qualities, and it's thought of as one of the best education systems in the world. And one of the tenets that it was built on is something called academic freedom. And this idea that we want our educators to be free from kind of political and organizational kind of mandates and control, and we want to have that freedom of thought, inclusion, and make sure that you can have two professors teaching the same subject at a school with differing approaches and differing opinions, and that is a huge benefit for society and for our country, and that's something we want to foster. And it's built into contracts and laws in certain states, and it's such a core tenet. And I think one of the things I worry about is when you look at technology coming into our education system, is typically when you bring technology into a company, you are driving for standardization, you're driving for control. You need to make sure that everyone has the same thing, the same experience. And that's kind of CIO 101. That's the way you approach these things. And I think in the education space, you still need to do that. You need to worry about data security. You need about student privacy. At the same time, you need to make sure you don't squash the creativity and the new ideas and different ideas. And so I think that juxtaposition is an important role of a CIO, is how do I keep a safe, controlled environment in which we can have different experiences and different points of views, and don't inadvertently squander some of that.
Well, yeah, because I guess from what you're saying, it makes me think that like there is kind of a harmonious balance, that can be strived towards to not wholly like do one at the cost of the other, like right. It makes me think of like if you're kind of embedding things like in an LMS, for example, and it's maybe trying to do it in a way that like it kind of gets out of people's way. Like it's just like kind of behind the scenes where it's like, yeah, we've embedded something that like verifies, because obviously like, like a single sign-on system makes sure that like, okay, only people that have access right, and, that like get in. Or like if there's something that verifies like when you're doing an exam or something, it's almost kind of like pretty quick and instantaneous, and it's just out of your way. You can just take your exam. You don't have to like, worry about those things. So I guess, is that kind of what you kind of
it's balancing those two things. I think I do a lot of work on the standards bodies with IMS Global and others. And, I think this is kind of the part of that unlock. We need to have standard things and protections and create a safe environment. At the same time, if there's this new great ed tech that comes in, we should make it easy for a professor to say, I want to plug this into my LMS in a safe and secure way. But it may be very different. It may be, a startup that's just has a new way of doing things. You have to create that open ecosystem in a safe and secure way, which seems like a oxymoron, but I think that's the challenge for them. Is we need this openness. We need to be able to bring new technologies to play quickly. But student privacy and security is a real important thing. And even in that realm, how do you protect student information, but at the same time allow it to be leveraged for insights? Students tell me, I would love for you to tell me which areas I'm struggling in. I'm trying to figure it out, but you have thousands or millions of students who are all struggling, answering questions in interesting ways. Can you help me understand what I'm struggling with? At the same time, I have CIOs at schools saying, I'm not sure I can give you access to this type of information. And so they're both well-intended and both looking for something, but if you take it at the surface, they kind of contradict itself, and it becomes lowest common denominator. We only can do so much because we're protecting. And so I think that's where we need to be very thoughtful in the individual decisions, and how do we balance that, leverage technology for what it can do, bring new ideas in a way where we have to make sure we know what we're protecting from whom, and we feel comfortable that we've accomplished that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think definitely a lot of relevant stuff that I'm sure is on the minds of a variety of hired professionals listening. But I guess it also makes me think, because I think that's like kind of like at the core, like definitely that's like the balance that needs to be achieved, is just sort of at the core of the digital education experience we're focusing on here. But I think there's the other part of like, kind of, everybody wants scalability, just the ability to really kind of grow as quickly as possible. And that kind of gets to that balance of just like standardizing a course design or something with like a subject matter expert, but then also allowing for a little bit of like freedom expression, that academic freedom that you were mentioning, and that sort of thing. So I guess any thoughts on that, of just sort of like that ability to kind of like, okay, well, we need 5 different sections of this one course, so we'll just like carbon copy, make them all the same, and everybody's going to use the same playbook. Makes a certain amount of sense. But then like, I know sometimes students even notice that it's like, there's something a little bit lost, with that. So I guess any thoughts that you have on that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, we use kind of the term principles of design here at Cengage a lot, and a lot of that is taking the time up front to understand what your objectives are and think about who the different audiences are, the different personas, and then what are your intended outcomes. And I think putting that work up front to talk about in this class, in a developmental math course, all right, what is our objectives? Who is our audience? What different components? And I think that's where you start talking about, no, we want some freedom of expression here, or we want some divergence of opinions. And in other areas, it's like, no, we're trying to teach basic math. So in this area, standardization is a principal design for this class. So I think course designers and learning designers and the technology teams need to work through those more abstract templates of, here's what we're trying to accomplish in this class. And then it's something we can now kind of look back on once we've built the courses. Have we met those original principles and those original objectives? So I think that plan and design is a huge step. Unfortunately, we were all thrown into the deep end during COVID, and we threw classes together and we got them up. And I think it's now kind of that 2.0 time for 2.0, where we look at what we had, we think about what it was, and we really kind of do those retrospectives and decide how do we plan for the future.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking of. It's just like, reflecting and acknowledging where it's like, yeah, maybe, we got some feedback that it felt kind of stale, because it was somebody just kind of like teaching a course designed by somebody else, and their heart just wasn't in it. It wasn't like any kind of like, creativity to it. And then like, iterate, improve, and, that sort of thing. Like, ideally folks, like learning and design teams kind of having that capacity to,
that's what's great
build
about
out new things, but improve the old ones. Yeah.
That's what's great about technology. We can change it. It's so much easier to change. It's so much more malleable. It's much easier to change it was much harder to go, oh God, I don't like chapter 7. Unfortunately, it was in between chapter 1 through 6 and 8 through 25. So changing it is logistically complicated. It's not anymore. So as we start to free ourselves up and create more modular components, we can iterate on different areas. So I think this is, other industries do this all the time, and education is now just starting to realize kind of the power of this new metaphor that really it's a lot to learn, but it actually has a lot to offer that can allow us to continuously improve and not be locked in for long term in certain decisions that at the time may have made sense, but in retrospect are not what we intended.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it makes me think too of, even just in the basic sense of like kind of acknowledging that like, okay, well, yeah, maybe people don't have these like robust data, reporting and visualization infrastructures, whatever, because like they can't, get everything kind of plugged into each other. But it could just even be like, wow, like everybody did really bad on that quiz. Like they just didn't seem to understand, whatever. And like trying to like kind of gauge those things, because like you said, it's like, well, maybe I can make this module a little bit different. I'll add in another like resource or something, and like just those little minor things you could kind of just see.
Great. One of our products has, we call it a progress report, and it's fascinating to see how instructors are using it. And it basically plots every student in your class's grades with their effort. So I know when students go in and take their self-tests and quizzes and how many flashcards they've gone through and pages they've turned. So we take that information and we plot it on kind of how much work did they put in and how much outcome did they get, what grades did they get on the assignments. And it's fascinating. You talk to an instructor, they're like, this is amazing. It's helping me prioritize my time, because I have lots of students who are asking me for office hours and extra help. And I can see that this person is is working super hard, but just not getting the success that they're looking for. This other person isn't doing any work, but they seem to be nailing it, and they are doing great. And this other person, look, they're not putting the time in. They need less of help in an area, but more of a kick in the butt for focusing on spending more time and the effort. So, now that we've moved this digitally, we can now have all of these signals that the systems are pushing out, and both the student and the instructors are starting to understand this is, I've talked to students who say, I worked so hard in high school, I didn't realize now I'm with a whole lot of people who work twice as hard as I do. So being able to see where I sit in an effort perspective with the rest of the class helps me understand, am I putting more effort in? How do I deal with time management? So these are tools that are out there that, really valuable as you start to look at not changing how we learn, but just augmenting the processes that always happened. Everyone has had these questions all along. Professors stand up and say, did anyone get this subject? Maybe it's me. Maybe I should teach this in a different way. Or did they not do the homework and they didn't understand? Now we have more tools and more information to be able to help answer that question in a more detailed way.
Yeah. Well, and I love that you use that word augment, because that's always kind of how my mind kind of thinks of these tools like properly being used is it's not replacing, it's augmenting. And, I was going to use the adage of like, it's sort of like high tech to empower high touch. Like you're saying, it like allows like a faculty to say like, oh yeah, like I can focus on the things that students seem to be struggling on. Like I can have something tangible to kind of go on versus kind of, like you even said too, like students sometimes like, oh, I don't know. You tell me, like you like you should know, maybe, right? I don't know. Like, they come to an office hours and they're kind of at a loss of like, I don't know what I don't know. Like I don't know what I should be, putting more of my time into. So,
it tightens the feedback loops. In the traditional way, the feedback loops are unfortunately very long and not as verbose. And so, if we can use these feedback loops into the same process, you just tighten them up, and you can do kind of continuous improvement on a much more ongoing basis. And I was up late last night with my daughter, helping her with a research paper. And, when it hit midnight, I thought, is this because you didn't start this in time, or are you not focusing on it? Or did your teacher assign something in this world of COVID in their first experience that was just overwhelming and was too much for the situation? And I had no idea. And so we kind of fumbled through it, and and that's tough. And it would be great to have understood, for the instructor to understand how much time all of their students are putting into this, and was that what they intended? And it's tough. And these information loops, I think we're getting more and more comfortable with them. I think it is something I spent a lot of time with personally on. You have to use information for good, and you have to be careful not to be kind of the creepy big brother looking over everyone's shoulder. And so how do you strike that balance of, it's something that's going to help the process, it's something that's going to kind of inform a decision that people are about to make, and it's not going to impede in their privacy and kind of their use for the wrong intentions. So it's a delicate balance, and it's something that we talk about on, I would say, almost a daily basis on how can, there's a lot we can do, but there's only some of things we should do. And how do you make those more subjective decisions as we're building products and building reports and looking at how to augment education?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, of course, my like silly brain goes to like, I don't know where Big Brothers get such a bad rap, because like, they could like, be looking over your shoulder and trying to help you out,
and
not just
Big Brother. I'm right with you. I totally understand.
But like I have a big, so just like, I don't know, not so bad, they could be helpful. But yeah, I mean, that's the idea, is like, because I think, it's always about like doing it with sort of like a soft touch or something, where it's just like, we have these insights and like sort of good intentions. And, especially if you have like a success coaching kind of program, you have people that can sort of use that information and rapport that they've built up over time to react to things that are happening and be supportive and, give resources and all those sort of things. So I think it's, all in the execution for sure. But
and it's all we found. Transparency is such a big component of it. We have to tell people what we're doing. They have to understand what it is, and then we have a privacy statement that we've published and we put on our website that is very clear what we will do with the information, and more importantly, what we won't do with it. And so I think that that transparency and then trust are two things that we have to have in this space. And then you can as people open up, there's so much more you can do with the information. But it's a tight line to walk.
Yeah, well, that came up in a recent episode as well. Is like with these kind of transitions where like students who maybe their courses weren't uh, housed in the LMS and now they're in there, but then when they take an exam in there, there's like monitoring stuff, and it's just because it's foreign. And yeah, like it's a kind of transparency. Like if
Yeah.
you're kind of more forthright with like, yeah, so we're taking courses in here, and there's like an online orientation that explains all the tools and those sort of things, and you're like, oh, okay, like it's as if like when I take an exam in person, there's somebody proctoring it. It's like, well, yeah, we kind of have that, but in the LMS, and it's like, oh, okay, cool, and it's
Yeah.
not like a surprise when you log in for your first exam that there's this like whole thing or whatever, that's like watching you and your clicks or something. But yeah, I mean that's so great. I mean, yeah, just the transparency and just being real clear with like privacy statements and stuff like that is definitely in support of that. Well, then, just kind of like speaking of resources and things like that. I mean, you mentioned like an article, I guess, that you had put together. I'm not sure if that's like out and about that we could share. It'd be great to feature that in the show notes. But anything else that comes to mind, books, podcasts, websites, anything, conferences, associations, anything that you would want to give a shout out to, give a tip of the hat to that we could.
Yeah, absolutely. So it should be published by the time this goes live, so we can probably get my article up there. I think it's a rare, unfortunately, I've been looking for that. I've been trying to think of how I can help. I talk with lots of CIOs, and we recently put together a working group, and we brought, I think, about 26 CIOs together to really say, look, we just want to foster a conversation, and we're here. We want to throw some questions in there, but we really want all of you to talk to each other. And so we're going to keep pushing that. And but I think things like IMS Global is a great association. It's been around a long time, nonprofit that has focused on standards, but through their research and papers they've put out is a lot about talking in these areas. So when we talk about how we integrate with the LMS, privacy is a main component, and it's part of the working groups as they're building those standards. So I think really engaging in these public standards and the working groups in those areas is a great asset for the audience. I think the thing that we're looking for, and Cengage is trying to help foster, but we explicitly don't want to be leading it, is we need CIO groups. We need in Boston, I'm part of the CIO consortium where we all get together and talk about privacy and just kind of classic technology components. We haven't seen these groups be created with education focus, the CIOs of U.S. higher education and how that comes together. So I would say, unfortunately, I wish I could give lists. I think Cengage is going to try to sponsor some, but I think we need some CIOs to step up and try to create these groups, and would love to help them with that. But it really, I think for these to be successful, in my experience, it's been the grassroots effort that these groups get pulled together by people who are in the line of fire in these areas and really looking to their peers for help. So I would say, EDUCAUSE has a few that they're starting to spin up. It's something that EDUCAUSE used to be more focused on. It's where IMS was spawned out of. So I'd say, I think more of the members to go back to EDUCAUSE, and instead of going right now, it's more of a place where you can buy desks and servers and physical goods. But I think more into solving the technology problem is something that we're going to start seeing in those types of industry conferences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good stuff. Well, then, I mean, you kind of alluded to being one to, I guess, look ahead and predict things for the future. So I'm curious, I guess, any final thoughts that you'd want to share for the podcast here on digital education moving forward into 2021?
Yeah, I think, I think it build on what I said before, that I think the instructors around the country who were thrown into the deep end, the good news is they didn't drown, and they still need to work on their strokes, and they need help. I think, for schools who are really going to embrace this, they're going to really reflect on this time of COVID and then work through how do you scale what we had to figure out in the line of fire. And so I think the CIO is really at the center of that, to be able to start kicking off processes on how do we train new instructors? What's the onboarding process? What kind of expectations do we have with our LMSs, with all of the partners we bring in? Customer service is a big component of when a student has a problem. Is that because a the LMS provider, which is in the cloud, is having a problem? Is that because the internet on the West Coast is having a problem? Or is that because there's a bunch of people down the hall on their Xbox sucking up all the bandwidth, and that's the problem? And this, from the end user's perspective, I don't know whose problem it is, but I can't do my homework. And so really focusing on having a great experience, and technology and education is going to have to be kind of like the dial tone. You just expect it to work. And to do that, there's a lot of infrastructure that schools and service providers are going to be able to have to bring to the table to make sure that this thing that can really help and be a great experience doesn't become an obstacle because of kind of the logistics of the situation. So I think I'm an optimist as well. So I think in 2021, what we're going to see is people are going to start to learn their strokes. People are going to start to work through more how to systemize this in schools. And, I think the experience that we've had is a lot better than we all thought it would be in April. But we still have a lot of opportunity to make it even better. And I think everyone's kind of poised to be able to do that.
Yeah, such great stuff and such a great message to end on. And I appreciate you so much for jumping on and sharing all that you did. And we'll have some good resources to check out down in the show notes. But
it's great, Dustin. I really appreciate you pulling this together, and it was fun to do.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Higher Ed Geek podcast.